Good afternoon, folks. We are live and up and running once again. I think I've got everything set up on this side, so let me go ahead and switch layouts, and we'll go ahead and get started with today's Beatbox Jam stream. All right, let me make sure my sources are set up correctly. We'll turn on a quick little loop I put on in the background, and we'll break down what we're going to be working on today. I see Red Dragon's here. How's it going, Red Dragon? How is your Sunday going today? Did you kick that cold yet? I hope you're feeling better. All right, we've got sound devices set up. I'm always reminded, since I do these every several weeks or so, these streams, I always forget how much setup goes into getting all of my devices and everything positioned and hooked up and working whenever I do this. But I think we got everything set up. Settings are good. Let me know if I need to adjust anything with the sound quality itself, but we're more or less working off of what we usually do for these jam streams. Air Dragon says, I thought Saturday was Sunday, and yeah, getting better slowly. Well, that's good. Yeah, the weekend has been flying by. I had a lot I wanted to do today, but I woke up very late. Maybe an hour and a half before the stream. So I'll have to do all that stuff after, including some recording for an upcoming project. So what are we doing today? Well, as the stream title suggests, we're going to be breaking down some discussions after we do the warm-up on styles, which we've talked about before, but I'm going to talk a little bit about like blending and switching styles. Is kind of an extension from whenever the last time we talked about it was. I think it was a few streams ago. Red Dragon says, waking up late is normal for you. Hey, I was up at like 8 in the morning yesterday. I went to sleep early on Friday. But that usually happens on my fast days because I run out of energy much earlier than normal. And so it wasn't enough to reset my sleep schedule, and then I went to sleep late last night. So one of these days I'll fix my sleep schedule to normal human hours, but the struggle is real. And so the technique and sound theory portion of the discussion after the warm-up will be talking about style blending, style switching, and maybe some techniques for jumping between really different and contrasting styles when it comes to beatbox routine construction and putting things together. I think we can come up with some interesting talking points just based on my experience and stuff that I've seen since I was learning. And then we'll see how long that discussion takes. And then the rest of the time will be spent on BGM brainstorming. And it has been a minute since we've done one of these, so I definitely think it'll be good to get some ideas together and think about some things we could put into future BGM releases. And I still need to finish doing the recording dump from my loop station onto my computer. I've done a handful of the tracks, but there's many more. There's probably at least 24 more that are quote unquote finished and need to be loaded and recorded so that I can figure out what releases they're going to go into. But I have been sort of splitting my music time between not only the instrumental BGM tracks for royalty-free stuff, but also some actual songs. And I'm hoping by summer or maybe the end of spring, one of them will be finished. And maybe by the end of summer, I'll have a couple of them finished and I'll be able to release them. It's going to be kind of like a string of individual songs as opposed to like a full album. The full album that I've been working on, it's gonna be a while. I need to go back and retool some things, so I'm kind of switching my release schedule around a bit. But there should be some other stuff coming relatively soon if you folks think the actual rap stuff that I've done is interesting. So we'll see. A lot to do. But we can go ahead and clear this off. And make this file blank so we can use it a little bit later. And we will start with some basic freestyling practice to warm up. And then from there, we will segue into technique and sound theory discussion. So let's see. This won't be kind of an endurance test because we're not doing that at the moment. But I'll see if I can string together a bunch of things at once without stopping, just to practice for when we eventually do try and set the freestyling record for personal best, which will be one of the streams in the future at some point. So let's give it a try. This will be like our sound check too. All right. Let me get some water. And we will move on from warm up. We change the caption here. And we'll move on to the next topic for the Beatbox Jam stream today. Technique sound theory. And so in the past, to kind of build off of what we've discussed when it comes to the topic of styles, both in just regular kind of flavor of beatboxing for when you're just learning, and as you kind of develop your preference towards different genres of music or different kind of styles of construction when it comes to creating sounds, and then patterns of sounds, and then routines composed of patterns. If you think of it in that order of construction when it comes to putting things together. Since when you're first learning beatboxing, you're trying to figure out how to get the sounds to come out, how to do the different techniques, the different types of sounds, be they vocalized sounds like a bass or percussive sounds like the different drum kit elements, you know, your kick, your hats, or your snare. And once you start getting a feel for being able to do the sounds on command and being comfortable with them, you start putting them together to create rhythms. Usually people start with the percussive stuff, so they'll start creating simple combinations of the drum kit elements, just like you would be if you were messing around on a drum set and hitting things to create a rhythm. And then from there, you start pulling in different ideas or elements that are going to build out the quote-unquote song you're making to cover all the other instruments, whether it's having synths or including things like basses. Usually it seems like people go from the rhythm to the bass, since the bass kind of drives a lot of the song, and then from there incorporating other miscellaneous elements that are going to supplement the bass with things like synths or additional sound effects or things like technicality, combos of sounds put together. And then you're building things piece by piece, just like you would if it was a multi-person band making the sound. And I think it's pretty interesting because everybody's arc from where they sort of gravitate towards in styles for beatboxing really depends on their personal tastes. I imagine the vast majority of the people who choose to get into beatboxing are big fans of music. It would seem unusual for someone to not like music at all and want to learn a musical art form, but I suppose it's possible. And so I think the result of that is people's preferences about what types of beats they put together and create is shaped by their personal preference and their affinity towards, you know, in their own personal lives, the type of music they listen to. That's just my hunch, because that was definitely a factor for when I first started a long time ago. I think what I gravitated to first in beatboxing when I started learning was hip hop type beats. And that's most likely because I'm a really big hip hop fan. I've been listening to this stuff, both mainstream and underground stuff, for a very long time. And being able to sort of incorporate elements of things that I liked and try and figure out ways to tailor the beats that I was creating into a similar style. There's definitely some overlap between those. And then from there, I kind of learned more about the different types of instruments and musical elements and whatnot towards adding to the overall beatbox kit. And then from there, I definitely kind of branched out into electronic type music. And that's most commonly the type of music that I create, not only in beatboxing, but my actual music release stuff is all electronic. You know, I don't play any instruments aside from a keyboard. But once I started learning about how to kind of incorporate electronic bass music, not just EDM specifically, but all forms of electronic music, then I think probably around then I was still listening to a lot more dubstep, and I still do. I think learning the basses helped me kind of build out the style emphasis on things like dubstep for heavy drops, kind of more aggressive, lower sounds that are supplemented by knowing the basses. You can't really do dubstep with aggressive bass drops and whatnot without having a grasp on one of the different forms of bass sounds in beatboxing, right? You either need to be able to create the vocalized basses, like your throat bass, vibration bass, vocalized chest or inward bass to get low, like really heavy low end sound, or you need to be able to do things from air control based or lip based bass sounds, which lip or tongue, I would say, are the second class of non-vocalized basses. So things like the inward lip roll, which I did a little bit in the warm-up freestyling I was doing. You want to get that kind of heavy sound that's going to punch the low end on speakers. If you're performing this stuff, doing things like an inward lip roll and getting that low kind of heavy oscillation is one way to do that if you're not using like a vocalized bass. So the example would be if you were structuring a drop or something that's going to require that low kind of punch of bass, doing something like a either prolonged or like shorter singular hits will give that low end to whatever you're doing. Likewise, if you want to go for like a more 808 bass sound, you can loosen up the lip roll and something like a hip hop beat, and that's how you're getting the really loose, open inward lip roll that you heard me doing the freestyle. It sounds like it doesn't have quite as much rattle and oscillation like the inward one, like the siren one that I usually do, but it still does reverberate and it oscillates enough that if you do that on a heavily configured sound system with subs, it will shake everything because of how low it comes in. Red Dragon says, the music side of a song I find hard, but the lyrics I find easier. Yeah, I can understand that. As a person who's not formally trained in music, I understand that pretty well because I don't know music theory. So if someone said, compose a song using musical fundamentals, right? Set your key, set your time signature, and write it all out in sheet music. I can't do that because I can barely read sheet music now. It's been so long. But if someone said, I want to create a song that conveys an emotion or an idea, and I have a bunch of ideas to work off of, it's much easier for me to write lyrics. Since I've been doing beatboxing, the sound side has gotten a little bit easier because I can use the tools that I have in beatboxing to compose, quote unquote, compose something and create a song if I wanted to. Or I can use that as a basis to take my instruments that I have here on the synth, which is turned off right now, but it's still hooked up to the loop. And I could kind of visualize or map something that I want to create using maybe a beatbox template and translate it over to the instruments that are in my synth. So if I say, well, I want something that has a kind of steady rhythm, something like, then I could take that idea and map out that rhythm using the instruments on the synthesizer and then record it all on the loop. And likewise, if I wanted to simulate what the bass line is going to sound like, I can kind of sound the notes out using one of my beatbox instruments and then translate it over to the keyboard. I will say that getting into beatboxing made that intermediate step of having to beatbox map something and then create it on the synthesizer a lot less necessary. Since even though I'm not learning it note by note, using notation, using formal music structure or anything, the ability to compose each aspect got a lot easier once I started doing it using beatbox stuff. And so I don't really map stuff from one to one anymore. I used to when I was first starting out. But now if I have ideas, I have a rough idea of where I want to start with different notes, which is why you'll hear me sort of noodling on the synthesizer when I'm trying to set like a bass line. Or I kind of experiment with a combination of notes instead of going, I'm going to use a B flat, an A flat, and an F sharp. Instead of doing that, I say, well, I want to set the sort of starting point of the note progression here, and then I mess around with it until I can get a sequence, and then from there I build things around it, and I can hear by my ear if something clashes really badly, but I'm not doing it with any sort of formal theory. And so the kind of roundabout point to what Red Dragon's saying here is learning beatboxing gave me a bit more of the ability to kind of see the ideas for the song composition. I'm no expert at it. A lot of what I do is trial and error, and I know that's not the proper way musicians create things. That's why I don't call myself a musician. But learning one thing made it easier to learn the next thing. And so to kind of get back to what we were talking about, I agree. I find it easier to write lyrics. Every music project, this is just a disclaimer. Someone may refer back to this later if it ever comes up. But for the music projects that I do that have vocals, and the only stuff I've done right now has been like rap vocals, a lot of them. Anytime you see me release something that has vocals or lyrics, those lyrics are written by me. I know in today's age with the use of AI and stuff, that's the one thing I don't use AI for. I have collaborated with people who utilize AI to create like the bass tracks or the music, but the lyrics are always written by me. I've never used like a chat GPT or anything to create the lyrics for my projects. I've always written them myself. That's usually why it takes so long for me to write something, but I kind of don't really like the idea of just offloading the idea of how, or the concept of whatever I'm conveying to an AI. But if I did do that, I would just state it in the credits. Like, let's say, for example, there was a song that has song vocals, which is kind of the situation for the one big project I'm working on. There are song vocals that the AI builds into the track with everything else in the music, but the lyrics are written by me. And so, to me, in order to have some level of integrity with the creative process, I need to have some sort of input into what was being created. That's just a personal preference. If people use AI to write the lyrics and sing the songs, then I'm not going to judge them for it. You know, it's really common nowadays. There's no point in trying to hate people for it. But I've had people ask me before if my regular BGM stuff is AI generated, which it's not polished enough to be AI generated. All the stuff I do, I create with my loop station or Beatbox sounds, and I edit it into a release that you hear. But for the stuff where I'm using vocals, I've had people ask me that too, if I use like a chat GPT to write my lyrics. And the answer is no. I would disclose if I did. But up to this point, I'd rather write my own stuff because that's how I kind of at least keep it honest to what I'm trying to say. If I didn't care about what I was saying, then I would rely on something else to write the lyrics. But that's just a thing that I know people have asked me in the past. So in case anyone was curious or they need a reference point to when I talk about this, let's put a bookmark on the stream because I'm sure it'll come up more. And I don't really get offended if people ask me if anything I create is AI generated, because nowadays it's getting harder and harder to tell. Like, the real honesty is it's tough to tell if something is AI generated, whether it's an image, an audio file, a video, anything, or text, a written piece, an essay, anything. It's getting harder and harder to tell if something is AI generated. So I don't get offended if people ask me that. But going back to the topic of styles and thinking about how we tie this into beatbox practice for blending styles together, depending on your tastes and how you want to structure your beats in beatboxing, I think the best thing to do is have sort of an idea of where you're headed. Unless you're completely freestyling something, when you're putting together a piece or composition, you kind of want to have an idea of its progression, if that makes sense. So let's say I wanted to create a routine, not just a random freestyle thing, a routine that starts in a style but switches up as a way to create some variation for the listener to hear. That, in essence, is not hard. You're essentially stitching together two sections of music, but the real challenge is making it kind of blend and seem seamless and not abrupt. So a good example of what you wouldn't want to do, in my opinion, would be, let's say you were doing something like a drum and bass routine, and you wanted to switch to like a hip hop type of beat, maybe midway, which will have a really different tempo than something that tends to be faster like drum and bass. So we think of like a real simple drum and bass rhythm that we've used a million times on a lot of stuff here. You might have something like okay, so real simple 1-2, 1-2 drum and bass rhythm. You probably have some actual bass in there to flesh it out and whatever. But when you want to switch to the hip hop rhythm, let's create each component separately and then explain how you have to be careful about what you're doing when you're combining them. So again, keeping the first one in mind, let's say you wanted to do something a bit more kind of slower but punchy with a hip hop rhythm. So maybe something like so you wouldn't want to just stitch those together end to end when trying to switch from one style to another. And this isn't really a new concept we haven't talked about before. I think when we were originally talking about styles, I mentioned that transition is also really important so the listener isn't kind of abruptly blindsided or, taken by surprise when things change. You want to make it kind of seem smooth. But to kind of drill into that a little bit further, let's say you did do that. You just stitch two things together with one section and another section. And if you illustrate it, it would be something like, I'll do a few bars of one, then immediately transition to the other, and we'll kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to go from the drum and bass one to the hip hop rhythm, just again jammed up against each other. So drum and bass. And so, in a way, if you kind of speed up the hip hop beat a little bit more, then it could seamlessly blend a little bit more with the drum and bass one. But the reality is it's a different kind of feel. And if you were adding other instruments in that wasn't just a rhythm, then I think it'd be even more jarring in the transition because it doesn't transition. It just stops and starts. And so the idea of creating kind of a transitional section, it doesn't have to be a long section, but even just a few bars of the drum and bass section switching over in its tempo and its instrumentation and creating like a segue. I don't use that term too much this stream, but creating a segue or transition into the hip hop section, I think plays a bit more naturally to people's ears and allows them to understand that there's going to be a change and be ready for it. And it makes for, I think, a better presentation of what you're doing. So if we take the whole example, and then now we just kind of improvise a transitional period in between the drum and bass and the hip hop section, let's see how it plays to the ear and compare. So if we go with the drum and bass, and so because we're looking at moving from one relatively faster beat per minute to something that's going to slow down and be a bit more kind of mid-tempo in beats per minute, to me, the most natural way to address that would be to give yourself enough of a buffer in the transitional section you add to slow down the beat. Instead of going fast, and then immediately slower. Even if it's simple as adding like a kick line with a mix of kick snares, which is kind of what I did, and then you slowly start slowing down the drum and bass section until you're in line with the tempo of the hip hop section that's going to be switching to, then all it is just a matter of figuring out what you're going to do to click it over, essentially. And I use like a real quick, like a record scratch, like a you could do just a rhythm fill or a technicality transition. But once you've slowed everything down, then all you need is just a real quick single measure filler. And then you lead into the new rhythm and whatnot. And then you just go from there. And I think having it ramp down and have a period where the main rhythm that the listener was used to, again, drum and bass rhythm, they hear it change and then it starts to slow down. And it tells the listener that, okay, something is going to change in the song. Either the main rhythm's going to change, something with the instrumentation or the other non-rhythm elements are going to change, but something's going to happen. And then you hear like the record scratch. Then it starts up with the hip-hop rhythm. And it seems a bit more of a natural progression as you're going from one to the other. And again, this isn't really a groundbreaking new concept, but I think when people are putting together routines, that's one thing they focus on if they're trying to kind of merge different sections of a song. Like, you think of it like a progressive track. Section A, style, rhythm, or whatnot. Then section B, and maybe a section C. You want to make sure that each of the sections is flowing between them so you're not just stopping and starting. It'll seem a lot more natural when you do that. And that's a bit of an experimentation thing. I wasn't great at it when I first started. I would just start one, stop one, like most people do when they learn. But I also think, depending on what your intention is with whatever you're creating ends up being, you might be trying to bridge a bunch of styles together within the same genre. And I think the best example I could think of that in illustration would be going from for a drum step track, which is a subgenre of like drum and bass and dubstep that combines the two together. And it's a genre of music I really like because it's dynamic. And what that usually involves is sections with heavier, usually slower, not always, but usually slower, more aggressive bass sections, either with drops or the typical elements you might see in a dubstep track, right? So aggressive bass, and sections where you're hearing all that stuff drop, and they have the heavy sections and then it moves on. But then in a drum step track, there's usually a transition either with a drop or a ramp up to where the tempo and overall feel of the song picks up, and it transitions from the slower, heavier dubstep, which again, it tends to be a slower tempo, but not always. But it transitions from that to the faster tempo and instrumentation of a drum and bass track. And a lot of artists I've heard do that treat it kind of like a drop transition, and it'll ramp up, and then you go into the drum and bass sections, and it incorporates different types of the bass. Well, usually still keeping it heavy, but not always. And then you have things kind of seamlessly transition from one to another, and maybe it switches back to dubstep for like a second half, and then transitions again back to drum and bass. But it's a pretty seamless combination of the styles, and it's a really good way to illustrate what I'm talking about here for combining the different styles, because it's never abrupt, right? I don't think I could think of any drum step or drum step adjacent track that just goes with the slower plodding dubstep rhythm and then boom, it's just fast speed. There's always a transition, a ramp up, and then you progress from one to the other naturally. And it's kind of a cool way to blend styles because they're very different. Drum and bass, depending on who's making it, can be very heavy, and a lot of times is, but it usually is fast. There's slower drum and bass tracks that I know of, sure, but usually it's a faster beat per minute. And it contrasts really well with dubstep, which in a lot of cases tends to be slower, but both have the capacity to be heavy or melodic or both. And so that's always been my example for how you sort of bridge that gap in styles, and making sure that when you're going from one to the other, the listener is following you and not kind of lost or surprised or blindsided by the switch from A to B, or B to C, or A to C, or whatever it is you're doing. Now, thinking about other styles And I'm really not an expert on the whole like classification of music or whatnot. Just, again, I'm not formally trained. But if you think of something that really diverges from some of the other templates we've used, and I can't really illustrate this too well, but I'll try. If you're thinking about something like jazz, or even more of a pronounced difference, a bossa nova track, which is one of my favorite types of kind of chill styles of music. I haven't really done a ton with it here in the content. I do have 2 tracks that use that style of bossa nova. One is a very early one that I did with Beatbox sounds called Super Bossa Nova. It's one of the first things I ever released. And the second one is Friendly Surf. I haven't looked back at the RPG tracks in a while because I tend to not go back and listen to my own music a lot unless I'm putting it on stream. But if we were to go back to the last RPG project that I did, Songs of the Spiral, there's a track on there called Friendly Surf. And again, for folks who haven't seen the older projects or are newer to the channel here, I did a 2-part collaboration over the course of a year or so with one of my peers, content creator, streamer, and overall gremlin, Toxicure. We did a collaboration project where I wrote a bunch of tracks in the style of like old school RPGs from like the Super Nintendo days. And we structured it loosely around a set of characters and some narratives, and she did animations for them. And the first project is called The Lost Kingdom, and the second project, which was last year, is called Songs of the Spiral, and they're connected between the two. And so there's a series of characters that were featured in a kind of rough narrative in the first video and a bit more of a cohesive narrative in the second. And my job was to create tracks that kind of map a story and tell something from start to finish. The first project was a collection, more or less. The second project was more of a narrative without having like a text crawl telling you what's going on. But one of the tracks in the second collection, Songs of the Spiral, was called Friendly Surf. And it was a fleshed out, like bossa nova inspired track. And the reason why I'm sidebarring is to just kind of illustrate what I've done with that type of genre before. And so one of the really common rhythms of a bossa nova track to illustrate, and this is straight out of those tracks that I just talked about. I don't know what the time signature is on it because I've never really thought about what time signature it is on it, but it sounds like this in a lot of bossa nova tracks. Something like... Again, I don't know the signature on it. I have to look it up. But a lot of the tracks utilize that kind of rhythm, and they tend to be slower and jazzy and very kind of mellow and chill. But that's going to be my example here for taking a really unusual type of rhythm and then trying to blend it in with something else. If you're going to create a routine that was something that utilized a bossa nova rhythm, which would be very challenging and impressive to pull off, I think, you definitely would have to be careful about what you paired it with to not make it sound like, again, you're Frankenstein monstering the tracks together and just jamming them in a way that doesn't sound natural. And Red Dragon says, calling Wazi a goblin, I'm telling. It's fine. It wouldn't be the first time. And she better not deny it, too. I believe I said gremlin, not goblin. Same difference. But trying to think of what would bridge well with something like a bossa nova track, it would have to be something I think that matched kind of the tempo and overall vibe. So going from like a drum and bass rhythm to like a bossa nova rhythm would be a big jump in style. And so the challenge, if you were going to try and do that, would be to figure out a way that's going to get the listener aware that there's going to be an abrupt shift so it doesn't sound unnatural. And I don't know the best way to really do that. Maybe you could kind of stretch out the transition and add in some elements that introduce kind of the slower aspects, and maybe bring in either like more harmonic, like a distorted throat bass or something more melodic that's gonna kind of bridge the gap, it'd be hard. Thinking about like, let's do a real world example and see if we can workshop it in real time. Let's say we're doing like maybe like a break beat, which is fast. You know, break beats or like break core, very quick, very rapid, a lot of percussion. Let's say you're doing something like and there are elements in there that do sort of translate over to the bossa nova-ish type rhythm. It's just not going to be that fast. So maybe if you were doing that, you would want to, one, start separating out some of the busyness in the breakbeat and condensing it down, and then slowing it just like we did before with the drum and bass transition to the hip hop transition. And you start simplifying the rhythm, slowing it down until you can either do like a more melodic transition, or maybe bring in some elements of the bossa nova, whatever you're constructing. I'd have to think about it, but you put all that together so that, again, you're creating like a bridge between the two instead of jumping between the two. That makes sense. So that might sound something like, and I think, again, I'm doing this with just the drums. There's no other melodic components here, just for the sake of simplicity in the example. But I think if you were to bring in some other element that's not just drums as a way to build out what's being kind of switched over or changed as you're moving from one section to another, that would probably, again, make it sound more natural to the reader, or listener rather, and not, again, sound jarring when switching from one to the other. That's tough. Maybe adding something like a trumpet or another type of distinct melodic instrument to set up a melody. I just don't think doing a trumpet with the bossa nova rhythm is going to be easy because of the sheer amount of tongue-based instruments there are in creating that rhythm. It's a lot of clicks. In fact, it's all clicks except for the kick. We're doing the... Oh, hey, Tsurarumi's here. How's it going, Tsurarumi? I did see Red Dragon called you out, but don't feel compelled to have to say anything in the chat. I think a lot of these Beatbox jam streams are good background noise for people, or hopefully good background noise and not too distracting. But welcome. Hope you are having a good day so far. Give me one sec. Sorry, that was my phone. Tsurarumi says, I was just in a group meeting for uni and doing some 3D modeling stuff. Oh, nice. Oh, that's interesting. What do you use to 3D model? I used to be a 3D modeler a long time ago, like 20 years ago. But I still do a little bit of stuff with 3D programs, just for mostly 2D design work. Most people I know use Blender now, but I used some older software to do 3D stuff way back in the day. I haven't really got into it recently. The game's a bit different now, but... Oh, okay. Game art, character modeling, animations, and prop stuff. Interesting. Yeah, I'd be curious to know what software you're using for the modeling. One I've really wanted to get into, I just can't justify buying a license for just myself, is ZBrush sculpting program. That one's really neat. I tried to learn Blender. Uh, it really frustrated me. The one I know best is called Rhinoceros. It's an older program that I think they still use in modeling, but it doesn't animate really. I think people use stuff like Maya for animation, or people probably still use 3D Studio. But nice. That's cool. I definitely respect the grind for learning game design stuff. And I say that as a person who can't code my way out of a box. I despise code writing with a passion. Dude Arumi says, once I graduate, I'm switching to Blender though, because I don't want to pay for a license of either of those. Yeah, well, the challenge I had with Blender, I know this is a sidebar, which is it's all good. Blender was a challenge to me because its interface wasn't as intuitive. And back when I was trying to learn it, this was a long time ago, probably in the early 2010s, there weren't a lot of resources for setting up like the UI, and I couldn't get it to set up the way I was used to in the main software I knew, Rhino. And so, function wise, it would have done exactly what I needed to do for modeling, but getting it to look and behave the way I was used to without having to learn everything from scratch was really frustrating. And I'm sure there's way more resources nowadays to get set up and figure out how that stuff goes. But back in the day when it was newer, it was kind of just the Wild West, and you had to either talk to someone who knew it and they could show you how to get everything set up, or sift through web pages to figure it out, since, again, this was earlier YouTube and not a lot of tutorial stuff was there. But yeah, cool software. ZBrush is really neat. I've messed around with it. I've just never owned an actual legit license, but like sculpting and stuff for like 3D printing, that's another thing that I never really got into because I have too many hobbies, man. If I pick up another one, I will get even less done than I currently do. But that's pretty cool. I hope your studies go well. All right. So to sort of wrap up the discussion on styles, what I think helps for people who are interested in learning beatboxing and kind of getting into the more composition based aspects, which is definitely after learning all of sounds and getting comfortable with just creating said sounds. And I've said this before, and folks who tune into these jam streams will hear me say this a lot too. The best thing you can do if you want to figure out how to build out your capacity for creating anything in beatboxing, listen to a lot of music. And that's not only to take inspiration, but it's to take a look at how artists and musicians are composing things and putting things together, whether it's electronic styles of music, whether it's hip hop, whether it's jazz, anything. The more you're exposed to and seeing a variety of techniques, the more you can kind of think about ways to inform how you're going to put things together. And it seems like a really simple, basic recommendation, right? You want to make music, listen to music. But it's true, because using all of the tools in the Beatbox toolkit, unless you are a classically trained musician, it's going to be easier to kind of observe how people who might have more of a classic training because they're using it professionally, how they apply that to whatever it is they're creating, and using that as a template to kind of figure out how you're going to do your beats and music. There's nothing wrong with using that as an influence and a start off point, just like with drawing or anything else. Don't wholesale rip off people's work. Use it as kind of a jump off point to create your own style and your own voice. And I think that's what a lot of people do, because again, I think it'd be very rare to have someone who's learning beatboxing that doesn't like music. So see what kind of inspiration you can find out there and then pull that into what you create. And then the idea of blending styles or creating multi-styled routines. Again, look at the way people kind of blend different things in musical progression and use that as kind of a learning point too. Like seek out people that stitch multiple things together and look at how they do it seamlessly, and then follow that same sort of principle for beatboxing. Sounds simple. It's probably not as simple as it just saying it, but again, the concept is there, and you can use it to tweak your process when it comes to how you're going to create beats. And so hopefully that discussion on styles is useful for people who are interested in learning beatboxing. Again, for Pseudo to me, since you're relatively new here, when I do these beatbox jam streams, it's part quote unquote lecture, me talking about a topic that I want to sort of explain to the community, but it's also an opportunity for people who are interested in learning about beatboxing, from the ground up. Or I've had people come through that are beatboxers that are looking to just have a dialogue about stuff. It's also an opportunity for people to ask questions too. Like if someone was brand new today and wanting to learn, then I got no problem explaining things from like just the starting level of, okay, what if you want to learn beatboxing, where do you start? What's the best way to go about it? And the streams in general are more of like an open forum for the first half for people to just ask questions or just talk about beatbox stuff. And that's why we do that, to give an avenue for folks who are interested or interested in learning. And if not, then, it could be just background noise about me yapping about a really interesting kind of musical art form. But what we can do is get ready to switch over to the BGM brainstorming. So let me switch my caption, and I got to switch my audio devices around. So I'll do the caption first, and then you're going to hear a little bit of feedback as I switch my mic because I have to reconfigure some stuff so I can talk. And then I'll explain my loop station setup and everything and how we go about coming up with ideas for the BGM tracks that I release. So do the caption, let me switch my devices. All right. I should be audible now. It's going to sound different because I have my mic plugged into my regular Scarlett, which is what I use when I'm doing gaming or drawing or anything else. It's going to probably sound a little less punchy because I don't have the same EQ and dynamic settings that I do on my loop station. But now I can turn off all my boosts and I can turn on my synth. So everyone should be able to hear the piano notes coming from my synthesizer. Okay. So, to do a real quick demonstration and explanation of how this all is hooked together and what we do when we're creating things for potential music tracks. The synthesizer, which is a Yamaha DGX205, if that means anything to anybody, is a Yamaha synthesizer with a bunch of instrument presets on it. And it is hooked up via aux to a Boss RC505 Loop Station Mark 1. And this particular piece of hardware, the loop, is very commonly used in beatbox content. People create some incredibly mind-blowing things using this device and its successor version, the Mark II, which I will get at some point. But if you're ever curious about the power of a loop station, just go onto YouTube and search Beatbox loop station battles and see what people do at the competitive level with this seemingly unassuming piece of hardware, and it's pretty crazy what people do with it. But this device is a 5-track, very versatile loop system that allows me to capture things from either my mic, which is not plugged in, so it's just the synthesizer, and loop what I capture back and layer different things. So let's do it with a rhythm. It's a bit easier to illustrate. This will be a good way for me to test playback too. So I'm not either too loud or too soft with the loop station playback. So let's say we wanted to just capture a real simple rhythm. Maybe something like that. So now I'm not pushing anything. Well, I'll drop it a little bit. Let me know if this is too soft for everyone to hear. So now I'm not touching anything. This rhythm is now just looping infinitely on the first track of my loop station. Once we have this captured, we can loop, to my knowledge, infinitely additional layers that are going to sit on top of this one track and loop infinitely as long as the playback is going. So if we wanted to do something like add in a hat, I can make that a little louder. Okay, you can hear probably faintly in the background because I didn't up its input quite as high as the rest of it. But if we want to do something else like layer in an additional snare, maybe probably not quite as loud. If we wanted to add a clap, then again, we just capture it as an additional layer on top of the loop we've already created. And now you can hear it all merged together, since essentially it's recording on top, and depending on how you set up the inputs, it's building each track one by one, and you're building a song track by track, if that makes sense. And if we move on from just the rhythm, let's say we wanted to get a bass line. And create kind of a low end that's going to, again, give some bounce or some push to the track. If I go to a bass preset that's on my synthesizer here, we start kind of in the low end. We've got a couple options on how to sort of augment the input that's coming from the synthesizer instrument to what we actually capture. And a good one for bass is something on the loop presets for input called guitar to bass, which takes an input and adds like a guitar based bass, if that makes sense, to it to give it more low end. It boosts the bass of something coming in. So without that effect on, again, real simple. We'll go one note just for the sake of simplicity here. If we add guitar to bass, I accidentally hit my fader, drop the volume down. I don't know how well this comes across for headphones on the broadcast, but the overall bass is much higher. And this is like 50% or 45%. Again, no effect. Effect. Get more of that reverberation. So if we were going for something that was going to shake speakers, adding that effect is really useful. But we can also alter the rhythm of the input with one of my favorite effects, the slicer, which basically takes the input and it cuts it by a set rhythm or set interval. So let's say we wanted to go eighth notes and make it so that the bass note wasn't just a sustained single note, but a more rapid kind of cut note to go with kind of more of a higher tempo. So the slicer is just taking it and is making 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 cuts to that input by a set rhythm, and makes it so you don't have to do that yourself. You can just use that preset Or you can even up it to 30-second notes if you wanted. But if we go 16s, now it's more rapid, right? So using a lot of the different effects that the loop station has, and there's a lot of them, more than I understand, and I've been using this piece of hardware for several years now, you can augment the actual instrumentation as it comes in and choosing what you capture. So again, for the sake of simplicity, we'll use the rapid 16th notes, and we'll just capture a bass line that's going to complement. Here, we'll up the volume a little bit on this. Complement the rhythm. The bass line's captured, and now it's looping ad infinitum with the rhythm. And these are separate tracks. So when I've got the playback, which again, it'll just go till I turn it off or tell one of the tracks to stop playing, I can turn off one or the other. So if we just wanted the bass line isolated for whatever section of the song that we're doing or performing or recording, then it's just a start and stop on the individual tracks. Then they bring it back. Thinking about the next steps of the composition, usually my next go-to after the bass line is some sort of melodic or higher end melody or sound set that's going to complement whatever we've done so far. And I think I'll use 329 for this, my favorite synth on this particular instrument, just because it's fun. So this one has what I call a kind of video gamey sound. It's technically called Square 2. It's Square Lead Synth, I think is the official name for it. But if you think about what it sounds like, to me it sounds kind of like a chiptune-y, video gamey type instrument. And I've used this one a lot. I've used this so much that I dedicated an entire EP to tracks primarily using this instrument for all of the compositions. And that was 329, released last month. April? I think it was April. But if we take this instrument and figure out what we're going to layer in with this particular series of rhythm and bass line, we can add some more effects to this one. If we were to take Slicer, maybe give it a different rhythm and a different interval. We could do something like do that and then combine it with a panning delay to give it kind of more of an echoey delay that moves around the sound channels a bit. And so that changes from to. You can hear it delaying and echoing a bit, but again, I don't know how it plays for the broadcast, but the way it's being recorded, the interval and repeating that it does is also moving around the sound channel, so it's kind of like circling behind your ears, going from right to left, and it's bouncing around, which creates an interesting effect when you're listening to it, but I just don't know if the broadcast shows that because I think I have it set to mono. So if we record something like this, and we loop it back, then we have a simple 3-track loop that's all going on its own. It's doing its own thing. Now the next feature, I know I'm doing kind of like a real quick and dirty explanation of the loop station, but I might actually be able to use this for something because it doesn't sound bad. In addition to the input level effects that change what's being recorded and looped, let me drop this down. And let me know if you can't hear what's going on in the background, but I don't want to be competing for what's being looped while I'm explaining stuff here. In addition to being able to augment what's being recorded and looped, we can augment what's going on at the track playback level with the track effects. So that means putting something like a filter, which I do this a lot. I need to be careful not to do it too much. So this filter, this is a low pass filter. It mutes out and kind of muffles the sound as you turn the intensity up and down. The lower it is, the more muffled it sounds, and the higher it is, this is a knob. It's a knob that I'm turning to change the intensity of the effects. The higher it goes, the more it backs off and gives you kind of more of a ability to hear what's being looped. Take that off. Vinyl flick. I forgot that was on this track. That one's weird. I haven't quite figured out how to use vinyl flick yet. It's the equivalent of taking like a spinning record and stopping it and like scratching it back and slowing it down, but it's not like the same thing as cutting a record and creating like a rapid scratching noise. You can kind of do that if you do it quickly, but really more it's to change, like permanently change the tempo. So I haven't quite figured out how to use that one effectively yet. It's neat, but you can't just do like rapid record scratches. That would be neat. But we could also do something like cut in a beat repeat. Which takes one section of the playback and, as the name would suggest, it's repeating it. So we can do something like set up a drop. Which I think I've done that on several tracks so far, especially ones that bring in something that's going to be a bit more heavy. You can use repeat to cut sections, and then you up the intensity and it shrinks the section down so it goes faster and faster. And then if you turn it near full, that's how you're getting the really rapid section before you cut it off and bring in something else. So I guess, let's say we wanted to structure an intro for that synth line. We could use repeat here. And basically set up the drop so that when you take the effect off, that's what intros the synth. And it creates, like, again, a transition to giving the listener an audio cue that something is going to change or happen. Either like something at the track level or you're bringing in another instrument or something. And so from here, thinking about how we construct the track, we've got 3 loop tracks out of 5 that have something captured and it's actively playing back. And again, we can turn things on and off as we want. And then just turn them back on again. So again, we're looking at overall progression about or between the different sections that we've recorded. And the way the loop station is configured, each track has its own volume control. So you can essentially mix it on the fly and say, let's say I was doing this live in a performance. as I was looping everything, I'm choosing how the mix is distributed for different volumes. Let's say I want the synth to be the most prominent thing, so I'll make that volume the highest. Or I want the bass to be most prominent, then I'll up the volume on that, and you can just move it in real time, and it just changes the volume of what's playing back. Very versatile, and you can tweak it kind of however you want. But with 3 tracks recorded, now we can think about what we would put for a 4th one, like another complementary instrument or something that's going to supplement what we've done so far. So we could take a low-end version of 329, we could even do a sustained note. That might be interesting. Just have or even give it a sliced rhythm, but a slower sliced rhythm than the bass line. That's interesting. Might actually need to be lower though. Yeah, a couple steps down sounds a little bit better. Okay, actually, let me save. I have a notorious problem for forgetting to save my work, and if I accidentally switch tracks, file tracks on my loop station, then it will not save what I did. And I've done that several times on stream to embarrassing effects and lost all my work. Okay, so we'll save this one. So now we have 4 tracks. 4 tracks playing back in real time. It's looping forever. And what we can do, we have a 5th one that's open. So let's look for one more kind of complementary instrument that we can add into the mix. And then we'll kind of organize everything into kind of a structure for how the song would be performed or recorded. And so we're keeping this one. One thing I'll just throw out to the chat, again, to explain for folks who haven't seen this before. As we get ready to complete in quotes, all the different things that are looping for the track to be recorded later, I usually open up the chat, an opportunity for people to suggest a name for the track. Many of my community that come through here have named a lot of the tracks that I've released as part of my projects. So while I'm figuring out what to throw in this last loop track, if anybody has any suggestions for what to call this thing, then feel free to throw them in the chat and I will write them down so I don't forget. But let's see if we can find another instrument we can throw into that 5th slot. Ooh, I'll be able to do something with a distorted version. This is a whistle. And it almost sounds like an ocarina. But if we throw, let's say we try and filter it. Actually, not that one. Creates an oscillation, but I don't know if that's really the effect we want. What I want to experiment with, maybe on a different track with a kind of a more aggressive vibe, is the lo-fi filter. I was listening to some stuff the other day, and the distortion you get for like the lo-fi effect on the loop station is neat. You can make it really granularize or make an input crunchy, in addition to just like a lo-fi sound you'd hear. Maybe we can employ that on the next one. Your Dragon says star bar or space bar. Okay. I'm assuming you're going for kind of like a club or bar vibe, somewhere where there's a party going on. It definitely has more of an upbeat kind of energy to it, so yeah, I could definitely see that. Ooh, we could, let's see. Now, flanger doesn't do a ton. Phaser is a possibility. Phaser adds kind of like a distortion, almost like a ray gun distortion over an input. And it does that without having to use Slicer to really break up. Without having to break up whatever the input is, it's just adding this oscillating effect that automatically makes its rhythm change. Red Dragon says that could be the name too. What? Which one? What'd I say? The club thing? Not really getting much effects from the input changes. Oh, this is just a straight up ocarina. This might be a little more clear of a sound. Oh, the name could be Phaser? It could. It absolutely could. I don't think I've called anything that so far. Ooh, if we turn Slicer up all the way, then it takes the input and it makes it sound like a signal beep. We might be able to work with that, especially if we're going for like Phaser as a title. This could be an alt synth line, something that we swap for the third track. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, we can up this one in the mix a little bit more than the others because it's kind of a soft instrument. I think I cut the loop off a little bit weird. Yeah, I think I hiccuped it by just a little bit. Let me fix that. There we go. Re-record it. That's a little bit better. It's okay if there's a slight hiccup because I can fade it in and then you won't hear it on the final recording. Okay, I think that'll work. Let's go ahead and save our progress. Now the last step before we move on would be to think of how we want to structure it. And as far as the name goes, Red Dragon, I kind of want to combine your first suggestion with the phaser suggestion to give it more kind of a unique title. I call it like Phaser Bar. It sounds like a bar you go to get shot at with lasers. That could be fun. Give me a second to pull up my suggestion doc here, and I'll write that one down. Phase bar. Yeah, we could do that too. Not Fazbar. Fazbar sounds like Fazbear, and I'm not trying to get sued. Phase bar would be cool. I'll write the suggestion down, and I'll think about it when I eventually get to recording this one. We want to put this under suggestions from the chat. I realize it's been a while since I've done a BGM collection because most of the stuff that we record here on stream, I've moved into one of the other collections or releases that I've done. But there are some on here. A lot of these ones have not been released. And I'm keeping track. I might have to go back through when I record these and figure out which one is named what from the stream archives. But they're all in here. All right, let's save that. And we got a hydrate from Red Dragon. Oh, only one today? I will drink water. There it is. I was wondering where the other 4 were. Okay. So I saved what we put together. Now let's think about how this would be performed or recorded. And I'm thinking we start with the single note 329 bass. And we bring in the bass line. Actually, I think it's going to sound better if we do the bass line first and then we bring in the one note. So we go. Now we bring in the one note. Just low and in the background, so it's not too distracting to the listener. Now we bring in the beat. Now, how are we going to intro in the synth line? One way to do it would be to cut the beat out for a sec. Let the bass line and the one note bass line play. And we bring in the synth and the beat. Red Dragon says, I mentioned you might like the game Expedition 33. I've heard really good things about Expedition 33. I would probably like it. It's like very like old school JRPG inspired. It's on my long list to check out eventually. But yeah, I've heard it's really good. Yeah, exactly, Red Dragon. So bringing in the synth will be kind of like, it sounds kind of like an alarm-ish, but we have it come in, play back for a bit, and we can even try a drop. But we're gonna have to select a spot that's not gonna make it rapid right off the get-go. There we go. not exactly the cleanest transition, but the idea would be to have the track start repeating and build up to a drop. And then once the drop comes off and the repeat comes off, then the synth swaps out for number 5. So I don't think we can have them playing at the same time. They clash. They don't clash dramatically, but I think it's a little distracting to have two high melodies going at the same time. And as we get towards the second half of the overall section of the song, we could cut out the bass and outro. And maybe we end with the 5th track with like a fade out, and that's how it ends. Okay, I think that's definitely a possibility. What we'll do is we'll save all that, and I will use that as a rough structure when I eventually get to recording this one. It might be a while. I have a lot in front of this one I need to get first. But what we can do is move on. Let's work on another one. That one was kind of like a quick breakdown of the loop station. So hopefully folks who've never heard me construct something in real time found that informative. But let's clear everything off and save a new track file here. Now, to open it back up, let's see what would be a good counter style or genre to do that's going to be a bit different of a vibe and feel. We got something more upbeat that you might hear in like a party atmosphere-ish. But let's think of something that is going to be a different feel. We could go for maybe a more rock-ish type of rhythm. Not necessarily faster, maybe even slower. So what if we slow it down, we add a bit more complexity? We might be able to employ some kind of heavier, darker elements here, which would be good for a Halloween release. There we go. I wanted to get the triple kick in there. See if we can get it to loop. Okay. Let's jump to another kit. This is the rock percussion kit. Think about what we want to add for a hat. I think I want closed hat here. Okay. We could also layer in another snare hit. Oops. And had it re-layering. I'll have to do the hat again. it's off slightly. There, it's better. Okay, for the snare. Thinking a more kind of dull snare hit just underneath to kind of round out the sound so it sounds a bit more punchier. First one staggered off though. Still sounds like it's staggered. Keep slightly missing the first one and nailing the second one. Weird. I think I'm early. Yeah, I think I'm early. There, I think it's better. Okay. So this sets up kind of a slower rhythm now for the bass line. I'm thinking we kind of manipulate the sounds for strings. What we could do, so this is just a basic string preset here on the synth. We can add guitar to bass. To give it more low end. And in order to give it a bit more of a kind of distinct sound, if we add an oscillating filter on top, now it becomes like this kind of moving up and down oscillating sine wave type of sound with the bass. I think the way it's oscillating needs to be tweaked slightly. I think it's oscillating too fast. Now I gotta figure out if it's the rate. Yes, it is the rate. That's a lucky guess. Okay, there you go. About 10 points down. Okay, the rhythm is fine. I'm just experimenting with the notes to make sure the rhythm of the oscillation matches better. But now I gotta figure out what direction we want the bass line to go. Start a bit lower if we're going for kind of a darker sound. Let's try that. keep the mix right about here for the bass line so it's audible. You should be able to hear me all right here. Okay, we're down here. This is D. What we could also do in a way to kind of build out the bass line, since we only have the strings, the distorted strings here, we can add in another instrument, either with an octave or the same note progression, but add a different effect so it sounds different. So I mentioned I wanted to mess around with lo-fi. Let's see what we can do with that. Ooh, we can go lower. I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't just start getting all crackly and gross. We could layer this in, but make it a lot lower in the mix so that it's not overpowering the oscillation. But it has this kind of grainy, kind of dirty sounding bass. Interesting effect. That probably would sound intense on a speaker system with big subwoofers. Okay, now let's think of what we can pair in as a melody with the bass line and the rhythm so far. What if we go piano, but we add some effects on it? I'm thinking a delayed piano. That was my initial idea here. This is the same notes as the bass line, but what if we kind of go for like a harmony? That's a possibility. Okay, let's get something looped and compare. I think I might have to redo the rhythm slightly. Maybe condense it a little bit closer together. Yeah, let's make it a bit more rapid, but same progression. Still think the rhythm is off, but I think I'll stick with that progression of notes. It's tricky because of the delay, so I have to kind of time it a little bit differently. Let's try and take the delay off and see if that makes it easier. I've got a hydrate and a stretch from Tsurarumi, and a drop a beat and a small from Red Dragon. Okay, let me capture this and then I'll take care of the redeems. Yeah, that makes it a little bit easier. But I might have to up the volume on that. Okay, let's try it again. There we go. Okay, that sounds better. All right, first, save. And then we'll do the beat first, and then I'll turn on small mode. We'll do it in that order, and we'll see how long it takes for me to remember to turn it off. I've toyed with the idea of just turning off the beat, drop a beat redeem for the Beatbox streams, since usually I'm beatboxing the entire stream anyway, but honestly, I should just make like a free one that I can turn on when I do these, because you can ask me to stop what I'm doing and freestyle a beat at any point on a Beatbox stream. My worry is that if I forget to turn it off and people just start redeeming it all the time on our normal streams, but it's all good. So let me see. Let me come up with something for the redeem right now. Maybe we'll try and employ what we were talking about with style blending and see if we can put it to actual use. I can put my money where my mouth is. Let's give it a try. All right. Let's turn on small mode. Whee! I'm just going to stand right next to the mic. All right. So let's play all three of our tracks back to back and see what we can add next. I have this idea to kind of work in a choir simulated synth for the next one, kind of like a sung with vocals in quote, and see what we can work in. Let's see. Let me go to my preset here. I have a couple different bass choir synths that I've used on tracks in the past. You can do something like that and maybe layer it with octaves. Maybe go 2 octaves down and go lower. I think the low end is too loud still. Okay, let's undo that. Go way lower. We want it to be kind of in the background, not overpowering the high end. Okay, let's try it. There we go. I'm gonna drop the piano down a little bit. What if we experiment with a high pass filter? Which tends, the way it drowns things out is a little bit different than the low pass. In fact, it tends to leave the piano alone. And then it kind of isolates the high end. It almost sounds like it's kind of pinching it together when you go near full intensity on the high pass. That actually might not be a bad effect to just leave. Because what I was doing before was just turning the knob and changing the way the filter's altering the track. But if you leave it on the setting that it's at and just turn it on and off, then it kind of sounds like it's just drawing everything into kind of like a really muted section. That's an interesting effect that I don't know if I've done before. And then we just turn it off instead of having it go up and down in intensity. I have to figure out a way to make it seem a little more natural, so maybe I draw the effect off before I turn it off completely. But I kind of like the idea of it going in this muffled section all at once. That's kind of an interesting way to employ that effect. Okay. Alright. I actually saw the timer go up. So let me return to regular size. Okay. What would be a good 5th track to layer in? We've got one more open track that has nothing looping right now. again, using kind of a mix of distorted strings, we have piano, and we have choir. We could go for like a sliced higher string, like undistorted string instrument. Or we can go for one of my favorite instruments that I never find a good place to put it, a harpsichord. There it is. I figure out where it is on the instrument line. And I know I've been doing a lot of just kind of 1, 2, 3, or 4 note melodies and transitions. I don't do that all the time, but it's been kind of an easy go-to as I get back into doing this, since I haven't done any looping in a bit. We could have it stepping up and then down and then maybe have a slight variation in the melody. That's not bad. Getting that really quick and short, kind of like a sting with the harpsichord. Plays with the piano a little bit while not clashing directly with it. Yeah, I actually like the way that sounds. Harpsichord's tough. It's such a distinct instrument that it tends to clash with a lot of things if you don't kind of slot it in correctly. And I'm not really claiming I'm an expert by any means. Okay, let's save that. I don't want to lose our progress here. Okay, let's think about how the song would actually be structured and performed. Would it make sense to have the harpsichord lead? I don't know if that would really make sense. Maybe even having the choir. And then we bring in the bass line, maybe? Now we're bringing the beat. Bringing the first synth. Okay, I'm thinking we let this play for a few bars, let it repeat. One more repeat, and then we're going to go into the filter, and we're going to use the filter to segue into the harpsichord. And again, I think for the recording, I'll have to actually draw the effect of the filter down a little bit before it comes off, so it's not just an abrupt cut off and then the harpsichord comes in. So what would that look like? Let's try it in practice. Yeah, that would probably work a little bit better. But I have to turn the knob down, turn the effect off, and turn the harpsichord on all at the same time, which is a little bit tricky. This song would actually have fit in pretty well with the tracks on last Halloween's release, the Lightbane Temple. This would have been like a natural order song, I think. Okay, now think about how we're going to go forward. I'm thinking maybe we have all the instruments except for the beat last towards the outro, and then right at the end, rather than do a hard cut like I did there just to turn them off, I think I'll actually fade them down gradually and then end with the harpsichord line as the last thing. Similar an idea to what we did before on the last track, and since I'll probably be recording the one before this and this one back to back, I'll make sure I don't do the same sort of idea and technique between the two. But yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with how the harpsichord slotted in. I didn't think I'd be able to get that to sound good, or at least fit on the first try, but I think it works. I think it plays off of the piano decently. First I thought they were going to directly clash and then I'd have to swap between the two. But because they're playing kind of at different times and they don't overlap a ton, then it sounds like someone is playing a piano and then someone is playing a harpsichord and they're kind of going back and forth instead of trying to trample over each other with the way they're playing back in the mix. Yeah, and so I think I'm happy with the way that layers in. So we'll go ahead and save this one. Before we get ready to wrap up for today, I know we only did 2 track ideas, but that's all right. I have to go and take care of some other stuff before it gets late. And I'm going to try and, while I have my loop station set up, do some recording for a project I'm working on right now. And so I'll open it up once more to ideas for the name of that second track. Here, I'll turn it back on as we get ready to wrap up for today. Kind of get a head start. Let me take a look at who's online that we could potentially raid before we get ready to wrap up. Alright, looking at the list, I see Tundra Tales is online. Looks like he's doing a fundraiser. We can go raid over there. Spread some chill vibes. Let me get that queued up. Oh, he's playing the new Doom. Nice. I want to play that eventually. Looking over at the chat, we can leave the suggestions open on this one too, since I don't know what exactly I'm going to use this track for. it definitely would fit for a Halloween release, but we'll leave it open-ended for now. So let me go ahead and pause that and do one last save. And what we can do is we will queue up the raid to see how Tundra Tales is doing. I'll probably not hang out there too long because I don't want to get spoiled for the stuff in Doom, but we can at least hang out for a bit and spread the chill vibes. What I will do is I will pause or mute regular audio and we'll go to outro. And we will get ready to call that a jam stream for today. Hopefully the discussion and the BGM brainstorming was interesting for folks who've never seen me talk about it before. But I definitely appreciate everyone coming by and hanging out. I will work on the stream schedule tonight for next week. It's going to be a short week because I'm going to be traveling at the end of the week again. But we'll be here for sure Wednesday. I just am not sure about the early part of the week. It's kind of hinging on my D&D session, which might get moved from Tuesday. So I will post that online and in the Discord once I figure it out. But we'll be getting back together for at least a couple sessions next week. But in the meantime, thanks again for hanging out, folks. Let's go head over and see how the dooming is going, and I'll catch you all in the next stream. Have yourselves a good evening or morning or day.